Hello, I'm Cosmo Dad. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be exploring brush lights. I recently had a viewer contact me on Instagram and ask me about them and what I thought about them. And to be honest, I've never really explored them. They're something that's been around for quite a while, but seems to be getting popular in different spots around the world right now. So I want to talk a little bit about that and explore. We'll discover some things together. It ought to be a good time. So let's talk about brush lights. There are a lot of tutorials out there on brush lights, which show a small portion of the application, none of the processing, and then the finished product, which makes me suspicious of this technique. If you can't show the middle or actually show how it's done, then you might be doing something else in between. So that's kind of a red flag right there. I haven't seen a good tutorial to take you step by step through the process and explain why and how it works. So I'm going to experiment with 2 different types of lightener, several different types of brushes, and see what we get. So we're really just applying the scientific method to hair. I have some air touch highlights processing over here from my previous video. We're going to compare the two, see the difference between the 2 application methods, how light they get, and how well blended they are. Several of the things that I keep in mind when trying a new technique or considering something for the salon: will I get predictable results and repeatable results? If I cannot get something predictable, then it's out right away. If I cannot get something repeatable, then that's a score against it, and it may not be something that I do often or ever. But if I know what a technique is going to get me, and then I know I can do it again, then it might be something that makes it into my repertoire of the things that I do. Does that disqualify something from ever being used? Of course not. But behind the chair as a professional stylist, for the most part, things that don't give me predictable or repeatable results are useless to me. So that's what I'm going to be looking for with this brush lights technique as I explore it, is predictability and repeatability. Now, when this technique first cropped up, I think I first saw it about 5-6 years ago. I saw people using paddle brushes. And they would apply the lightener to their paddle brush and then gently go through, saturate the hair on the ends, and work their way up. Combs and brushes do make really good blending devices. So one of the first tools I'm going to try to use is a paddle brush. But what I'm seeing online now is what looks like a branded brush. It looks like a modified nail brush. This is a nail brush for cleaning fingernails. It looks like a sort of a modified version of that bends down a little bit to maybe allow you to get closer to the hair without dragging your fingers through it. So I am going to try just a nail brush. But I have noticed maybe the bristles are a little softer, maybe they're using boar bristles or something like that. So I am going to use a fade brush that has natural boar bristles on it as well. We'll try these 3 different tools and pretty quickly probably know which one is going to feel the best during application. Another thing you don't see in the videos is what type of lightener is being used. You can kind of see consistency, but it kind of varies throughout some of the videos that are out there, and you never see the full processing time. So if I used a traditional lightener, or today I'm going to use a 9-level lift lightener, Paul Mitchell Synchro Lift, plus I'm going to use some foil or even some saran wrap to cover it, keep it wet, keep it active, so that it can fully lift during its process. If they're using a clay lightener, then it might work well to process it open air and not use a foil. So for that, I'm going to use Paul Mitchell Skylight, which is their clay lightener. We'll see. We'll try them both and see which process is the best. The last thing I want to talk about before we get started is saturation. You'll notice on any of the TikTok videos, or any of the videos that you tend to see that are tagged brush lights, that they tend to take pretty big sections. So they'll take a whole section like this thick, which is inordinately large for traditional foiling. But one of the things I want to point out is I think that is going to be necessary for a hairbrush application of lightener, because you're going to control saturation with the thickness of your parting. So I want you to notice how see-through the hair is down on the ends. That's because not every hair that starts out at the roots makes it down to the ends. Hair is always going to be densest at the roots because of all the new growth, and thinnest at the ends because these are all the oldest hairs that actually made it this long and have not fallen out to be replaced yet. No matter what tool I use to apply, it's going to be very, very easy to saturate these ends and very, very difficult to saturate the roots. And I'm actually using that to my advantage. That's going to help me with my blend. If I were to take a traditional highlight section, something pretty thin, let's take it vertically here, something that's see-through all the way through to the scalp, I can't help but get saturated all the way to the scalp. And that might not give me blended blurry lines. So educated guess, and from what I've observed online, take thicker sections with your brush lights, and that's actually going to be a tool that works for you to help prevent saturation further up and accommodate saturation further down toward the ends. Let's do a clay lightener first. We'll leave that open air, and then the front quadrant, I'll use the Synchro Lift Plus because I used the Synchro Lift Plus on my Air Touch highlights. That way we'll get a good side-by-side comparison. All right, so I've got my skylight mixed up. It's a nice thick consistency clay lightener. So I've noticed fairly thick sections with brush lights. I've noticed in some of the videos that they'll then come through here and take really big weaves. The only thing that I'm not necessarily too keen on that one about is that it is going to leave some dark hair down at the ends. And I want to kind of maximize our blonde and really see how this blends. So I am just going to leave this all in one section. So I'm going to get kind of a larger brush, take a bit of a forceful scoop, and work that into my nail brush. Let's see how this goes. What I see a lot of people doing is starting up here with their blends and then working their way down. That's fine. For me personally, I prefer to saturate fully first. I'm not going to try to mess this up, so I'm going to kind of brush the sides of these big sections too. And then just gently let that section go. Honestly, the way this is applying, I'm kind of digging it so far. Often when I'm teaching, I do the simplest sectioning. I just do things horizontally. When I'm teaching or when I'm experimenting, I'll do a really simple, because I can predict what changing my angles is going to do. But if I start everything at a diagonal and then I want to see how well of a blend I get from 3 different brushes, that diagonal is not going to help me determine that. So scientifically, I'm just leaving this all the same so that I can see which one of these makes the biggest difference. Let's do a brush. Once again, I'm literally just going to paint it on the brush. Oof, that's a lot. This is a brand new brush. I literally just took it out of the plastic. So there's no other people's hairs. There's no other like solutions or hairspray stuck to it. Whoa. I'm trying to be pretty gentle with my depth here. You can probably see I'm just brushing with the tips of the brush and then shoving it in a little bit deeper as I go through toward the ends, really trying to work that saturation. That was fast. Let's see how that goes. And now my sacrificial boar bristle brush. Best I can see, we load them up. I'm kind of shoving the product into the bristles and just leaving a small amount on top. I can see why they start at the top, because you're just kind of floating on the surface and then you can sink down into your section as you go. So starting by floating and then push harder and harder as I get to the bottom. So I can get something that's gradually more saturated. Out of the three of these, I honestly feel like this one feels the best. Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to do another section. I'm doing all of my sections about the width of my foiling comb. I did nail brush, hairbrush, boar bristle brush. Now I'm going to go backwards in the other order so I can kind of see the difference. Okay, this is kind of ridiculous. It's like super easy with this. Now I don't know if this is the lightener I like or the brushes I like, but this application method actually seems really quick and easy, and it's something that I could definitely foresee as being repeatable. Is there a rule that says I'm only allowed to use one type of brush? Absolutely not. Just very light touch, painting the surface. A lot of the videos are even messier than this, but like I said, I'm not trying to mess it up. Really got to squish it out and saturate there. I actually do suspect in the other videos that are being made that they do a clay lightener, because even when you see other sections, they haven't been foiled, and they're using what looks to be a pretty thick lightener. The other thing that makes me think that is in a lot of the videos, the contrast isn't that high. Once again, there's not that many, it's not like black roots, blonde, like light blonde ends. It's kind of like dark brown, dark blonde ends. So I'm gonna wash my brushes out, and we're gonna try this same technique, but with some insulation on that front quadrant and Synchrolift Plus. After washing out my tools, I can confirm that cleanup is not so easy with this technique. You really gotta get in there and really clean these tools up. What I'm seeing in a lot of these videos is it looks like somebody's doing the whole head. And if it's not a clay lightener, then they must be using a processing cap or something to sort of make a tent over all of the wet lightener sections. So normally with the technique where I need to keep my lightener insulated, I would insulate every single section individually. In this particular case, I'm going to try to replicate what I've seen in the videos so far. So I'm going to just do this entire section, then put some plastic wrap around the entire section to insulate it for the duration of the processing. So we'll do this entire front section with brush lights and a wet lightener. Now that I've tried all three tools, I think I'm going to do the traditional brush first, the nail brush second, and then the boar bristle brush third, and then just do it in 3 sections rather than alternating like I did back here. Definitely a little wetter. I'm gonna pack it in there. Let's see how this goes. That is kind of incredible how well that goes on. Try to get a little bit of a blend, and this time I'm going to try to just blend with the brush itself. I think one potential advantage of this technique is this probably could be used successfully on more wavy to curly hair without having to straighten it first. Just because of the nature of the tension of the brush, I think it might be possible. One possible disadvantage of the paddle brush is you can't really feather. Once I start digging these bristles in, I kind of need to brush all the way through that section. On to my fade brush. Weirdly, I feel like my saturation with the traditional lightener is worse with this boar bristle brush than it was with the boar bristle brush on the clay lightener. All right, and on to the nail brush. I definitely can see a difference between the clay lightener and the traditional wet lightener. Application-wise, compared to the videos that I'm seeing, I'm convinced that most people are using a clay lightener. Because in order to blend up this high, like a lot of the videos are doing, and have it just sit on the surface, a clay lightener is going to be your go-to tool. All right, now that section is fully saturated. All right, trying to keep the airflow to this section to a minimum. You do not have to expose your lightener to air. The oxygen is inside the developer. Don't worry about that. I'm protecting it from the air to keep it wet and active. So in my previous highlighting video, I did air touch highlights on this quadrant of the mannequin. In our current video, I tried some things out with brush lights. I did brush lights on this front quadrant with the same lightener as my air touch highlights, and that's our SynchroLift Plus. Covered this side with some saran wrap. And I also used the Skylift on the back rear quadrant and tried a couple different brush techniques. And now we're going to compare them because it's really we have a similar goal. We want hair that's lighter at the bottom, that's going to gradually transition up to something really smooth at the top. And you can see with the air touch highlights how smooth that transition is. And because I held the longer hairs down near the bottom, that transition to the solid blonde starts way down here. Now let's compare our brush lighting techniques. A couple things stand out to me right away. Let's take a look at them. Number one, these are all untoned. I didn't want to ruin the sort of the effect that we're getting with just the raw technique. Toner can often soften up a little bit of splotchiness that can be inevitable with some techniques. And I wanted to be able to see exactly what the brush techniques did for me. This was the SynchroLift side, 20 volume, same as the air touch highlights. And this was the Skylight side with no foils, just the open air processing. And even though this is a 9-level lift lightener, and this is labeled as a 7-level lift lightener, I feel like we have pretty much the same level of lift between the two. And that's kind of my first surprise. I was really like pleasantly surprised by the texture of this clay lightener. I really like it. Second is I felt like our transition is fairly smooth with that clay lightener. The blonde goes way higher than the air touch. I have like a really fast fade here with my air touch highlights. Go see that video if you haven't yet. And then that transition kind of happens all through here, and then we just have some soft highlighting through the top. Where with the brush lighting technique, I'm feeling solid much, much higher up, and I definitely could have been lighter handed or even taken larger sections to get a lower, softer transition. And then with the different lightener, I'm honestly feeling like it's fairly smooth. I thought that out of all of them, this might be the most sort of splotchy looking. And let's kind of part through. So with this first technique I did, I'm pretty sure I did the first one with the full-on brush. Really got it saturated. And I do feel like there's a little bit, depending on which way you turn it, a little bit of splotchiness in here. But I feel like with a little bit of technique correction, that can be addressed. When I pull the hair back, not seeing a whole lot of lightness around the face, where with other techniques like the air touch highlights, I definitely still maintain more of that lightness around the face, some really soft gradual highlights. That could be addressed once again with technique, maybe making sure to go in and not just brush the top, but brushing the front of the section. That might help. I expected the liquid consistency lightener to be a lot more splotchy than it actually is. I mean, I tried to keep it neat, but there's only so much you can do. So then in examining, this was then I believe with the Boar bristle brush, even smoother transition. And then with pulling it back, I do feel like I got higher up with that blonde. That's a really, really smooth transition. I'm actually quite surprised. And then with our nail brush, I did end up taking the smallest sections, the thinnest sections with this one, because I kind of ran out of hair. It got pretty saturated, and definitely I got some nice little transitions at the top there. However, out of all my sections, I do feel like this one kind of has some visible, what I would describe as splotchiness. Not something that can't be blended out with a root shadow or maybe even an alkaline toner, but it just doesn't quite look really smooth. That may be due to the tool that I used. That may be due to the fact that I did do thinner sections on this last one. Remember what I was saying about the thickness of the section being crucial to your blending, because you're unable to saturate a section that thick. That actually helps you with the blend. So I broke my own rule and I think paid the price. But all around, I am actually really surprised, and I feel like this could definitely be a viable, workable technique. I do want to talk about the limitations in just a minute. Let's review the 3 different tools on the back section with the clay lightener. Same order, I finished on the top with the nail brush, which looks most similar to the brush I see in most of the videos. And in this case, the clay lightener really worked for me to help with a smoother transition, although I do see what looks like a little bit of an issue saturating right in here. It's soft enough that probably toning this hair, nobody would ever know. When I pull the hair in any given direction, I do feel like the transition is nice and soft. I like what I've gotten. Now these sections here were most likely this brush, and once again, a little bit of saturation issues. Definitely with a little bit of practice, I feel like this could be a workable technique. I am higher up toward the face, a little lower down toward the back of the head, and I feel like it's pretty smooth transition that with a little bit of tweaking, someone could get really good at. On this section here, I feel like it's one of our best transitions. I'm pleased with the way that it turned out. Let's talk about pros and cons with this technique. Number one pro, as a salon professional or even as a client, the application is fast. That was the thing that surprised me most about this technique, is getting through the sections was really, really fast, especially with the larger brush. Just getting it on there, combing it through, and I think I would probably use a nail brush or even a color brush to help me with the blending at the top. I really liked how quickly I could get it done, and I feel like the results can be fairly predictable depending on your guest's density and texture. It's a great way to use a clay lightener. I feel like I didn't get really any better of a result with the clay lightener versus the other one. But I do want to point out that with the AirTouch highlights, I definitely got a lighter result with something that was individually insulated in foils. That brings me to the major kind of negative score against the brush lighting technique. One of the things that I look for in blonding services, like I mentioned before, here in Texas, high contrast highlights are very popular. So somebody even with this root color could be classified as around a level 5 on a scale of 1 through 10, might expect something even lighter than this on their ends. That's a fairly common request here. I could use the AirTouch highlighting technique on that guest, this process for 1 hour, so the full processing time of the lightener. However, if I needed to get it even lighter, I could, if the hair was still in good condition, reapply, open up each of my individual foils and reapply inside of those foils to wake things up and get this even brighter. Or if there was previous color and a line of demarcation, the hair above that had never had color will lighten so much better than the previous colored hair. So I may need to reapply in those foils just from that line of demarcation of old color all the way down. So for that reason, a technique where I'm individually foiling my sections allows me accessibility to go in and resaturate. If I did the brush lighting technique on somebody who wanted to be even brighter than this, I wouldn't have the option of reapplying that day. We would have to go in sessions. It would be too hard, and it's just this technique itself is too organic and a little bit random to try to reapply on top of the exact same section as it's processing. With that being said, I feel like that's the major drawback. If you want high contrast highlights in the same day, pick a different technique, something in individual foils that can be reapplied to. If you're fine with low contrast highlights, like 3 to 4 levels difference, then this may be a really great technique for a stylist to try out on their guest and have a really efficient service. So our criteria that we were really looking for is, does it really work at all? And if it does work, is it predictable and is it repeatable? I feel like based on what I learned today from doing this for the first time is it's absolutely predictable. I feel like with a little bit of practice, I can choose where my line of blending is. And if somebody wants like medium to low contrast highlights, I could predictably achieve that on a guest with the brush lighting technique, possibly knocking up to an hour off of application time, making it a faster appointment. Is it repeatable? Can I resaturate the same section same day? No. What would a retouch look like on this guest? Well, since the main goal of this is to get a soft transition here and a basically solid blonde at the bottom, I'm not going to do this same technique next time for a retouch. We may do something closer to a traditional highlight just to brighten up this new growth area when they come back in. So I wouldn't necessarily do this on the same person every time. So I feel like it passes the repeatable criteria. I can't really say how surprised I am. I didn't expect it to go so well. I didn't expect the transition to be so good, and I didn't expect the application to be so fun. Get ready for something that's a little bit more messy. You got to work on keeping your workspace a little cleaner, but I say go for it. It's a fun technique to do, a technique that achieves great results. Thanks for joining me. I really hope you learned something. I certainly did, and I'll see you next time.